What's up, guys, and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Stephen Davis, personal trainer and owner of Davis Fitness Method, his studio gym in Seattle where he trains clients. We cover a lot of ground in this episode, ranging from the importance of recognizing that your clients are human beings and not robots, to how understanding functional anatomy and other training principles can allow you to better individualize training for yourself and the people that you work with. We also talk about his roots in fitness, how he has evolved as a trainer, and how reading, self-education, and mentorship can have a huge impact on the path that you take. Big thanks to Stephen for coming on our show. You can follow him on Instagram at @the_Mr_Davis, or you can follow his gym at Davis Fitness Method. He puts out some great tips for training, exercise, execution, and more. We'll have both of those linked in the description below. This episode is part of our Professional Spotlight series, where we are dedicating some episodes to pros that are adding value and trying to make a difference by focusing on topics that they are passionate about and the information that they want to put out there. For those of you that don't already know, our website, Level Health, is a directory, community, and network of qualified health and fitness professionals. We want to help create a space where clients and patients are able to find the right professional for them. We have accounts for both clients and pros. Client accounts are always free, and we have 2 different membership levels for the pros. If you haven't signed up already, head over to levelhealth.net and set up your membership. Thank you for listening, and if you have a second, we would love it if you'd give us a rating and review so that our podcast and the professionals that we interview can get more exposure. You can also subscribe so you don't miss any of our new content. We hope you enjoy the episode.
All right. So looking at y'all's website, the first thing I see in big letters is evidence-based. I don't want to get this wrong. Evidence-based coaching, sustainable programs, lasting results. And it's really, really clear. Again, this is another reason why I wanted to get you on the show, because it's really clear that you put a lot of work into self-education and you bring that to your clients. I mean, I think that really only happens with personal trainers when you have like a driving force behind why you guys do what you do. So on that note, can you fill us in on kind of how you got to where you are now and why you're doing what you're doing?
I think how I got here is like a really long story.
Yeah.
But
Cliff notes it if you want, man.
Cliff's Notes version. In high school, they kind of make you decide what you want to do, like what you're going to do after school. And I was like, okay, either stuntman, chiropractor, or personal trainer. And left to my own devices, this is where I kind of ended up. I did like a internship at a chiropractic clinic, and I hated it.
A good chiropractor?
They're a good chiropractor. The work that they do is not interesting to me. And then it was like they had me sitting behind the desk and like doing like some like mail out postcards, like this is what chiropractic is. And I was like, I don't want to do this shit.
They're not doing a good job recruiting people, it sounds like.
So I then like reached out to a personal trainer and then like sought some mentorship. And then in my senior year of high school for my senior project, I helped my mom lose 30 pounds in 3 months.
As your senior project?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah. And so fast forward, kind of struggling as a trainer for like years, having to work multiple jobs, only to find out that I was kind of the problem there. I end up talking to a now mentor of mine. His name's Luca Hosevar. And he basically, I was at this crossroads where I was like, okay, well, do I quit training or do I, like go full tilt? And he was kind of like, well, can you say that you've given it 100% your best effort? And my parents would always say in high school, like, you're not trying and stuff like that. And like, I could honestly recognize that I wasn't. And so what we're seeing is just kind of this final sprint version of me trying my absolute best.
I think that's important, but I also don't think that can happen unless you have a deeper appreciation for whatever it is you're doing, right? And looking back, you may be able to see like that experience with your mom as potentially quite transformative, right? Because that really is like, when it comes down to it, it should be about helping people as a personal trainer if you want to do it long term. And like those little wins, it's a huge win for her and it's a huge win for your clients when that happens. But those little wins, like you stack those up, and that's what keeps you going. Keeps you getting up at 4 a.m. and staying as late as you thought, paying the bills with your own money and things like that. That's awesome. That's awesome. You worked in like a commercial gym, just regular gym for a while?
Yeah, like a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
I worked at LA Fitness, 24-hour fitness, YMCA. And I did like four different 24-hour fitnesses, a Gold's Gym. I tried to do my own thing once before, like as a mobile trainer. I was pretty young, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I just had like 5 clients, and I thought I was making a living. I was still living with my parents, and then that kind of went under. Worked at this gym called Rain City Fit, which was the last gym that I was working at before opening my own studio.
How is the fitness industry in Seattle generally? Because I can only imagine you have that many commercial gyms up there.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't necessarily attracting. I mean, I saw this at Gold's Gym that I worked at, a local box gym as well. They don't attract people that are actually there, or keep people that are actually there to help people. It's almost just like this high turnover rate. They're just trying to get trainers in the door. Is that what you see up in Seattle?
I think that if you were to look at the commercial space, probably that's probably what you would see, because it's more about the numbers and how many people are being serviced versus like the quality of service.
Exactly.
But there are a lot of smaller boutique gyms out here, and I think the people that are doing good work tend to be at those places.
Yeah.
And even places that, like, for the city area would be deemed like popular, but are still, I think, small on like obviously like a national scale, right? So but they started here, and I honestly I'm proud to be a part of the fitness space in Seattle.
Yeah.
Just because there is so many different people, different kinds of people, doing different things. And it's not like there's one right way to train people or for them to be fit. But yeah, just like so many different things for people to try and get into.
I'm a little bit jealous of that, actually, because the Tri-Cities is growing, but the fitness industry here is not. And that means, unfortunately, it's extremely competitive. It's us against them, every gym for themselves. And it's definitely frustrating, because what might seem as like, hey, we need to address how we're treating people in this, the people that we work with, the clients that we work with in this area, that becomes almost just like a personal attack to people. The next step for us is we're going to be reaching out to gyms like the ones that you spoke about, the smaller, not studios per se, but like the locally owned gyms. And we're going to try to onboard them before we ever talk to a big commercial gym, because we want to help those people really post COVID. I think that might, it'd be interesting to see if these kind of gyms, these locations, like these smaller, not quite big box gym, but bigger, if that's going to be kind of the new model, or like a training studio like yours. Because it's going to be so much more manageable. If they put restrictions on you, you're going to be able to do it, like work with it quite a bit more easily.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the actual questions. This is going to be probably a little bit broad one, but what is the importance of, as a personal trainer, what is the importance of understanding functional anatomy?
I think it's the difference between just thinking all exercises are exercises for your like glutes or hamstrings or quads, and like actually knowing what's going to have a long-term effect on your clients and their training. So like if you're looking at a B stance RDL and you think hamstring glute exercise versus lateral pelvic stability, and like assisting in internal hip rotation, or like depending on how you load it, ipsilateral or contralateral, how it's going to form like in rotation. Those are all big things, and it's very easy for somebody to be like, well, it's just a hamstring exercise, and there's better hamstring exercises out there because you can't load that one that heavy and it just feels like blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that is the difference. So like, I think, like if I was just going to break it down to like very simply, that is the difference.
Yeah.
And that can be the difference between actually breaking through plateaus and actually seeing somebody's life change, and you potentially injuring somebody.
Absolutely. It's how you fill in the gaps, right? Well, first you have to know where the gaps are.
Yep.
But like you said, say the B stance at deadlift, for example, you're getting some of the anti-rotation and stuff through the hips and everything. And then somebody's like you said, you can't load it as much, but like, that's not the point. That's not the point behind that.
And sometimes that's the reason why you want to do that. Like
Yeah.
you want to create a constraint so that they don't load too much, because maybe they've been loading too much and they've not been able to access the tissue that they were supposed to be trying to get on. So
yeah, it's kind of a forced regression. You just bake it into and that's what I want to talk about. So this is kind of the core, if you think about it, of effective program design, because you have to know, which tool am I using? Is it the appropriate tool to be using at this time? When can I use other, and that's kind of the concept of having a very broad toolkit, because you need to be able to pull these things out. And if you just subscribe to, I am this type of trainer, or I do these movements, and it's like, okay, that's fine, but they're not you. You need to be able to individualize for each person. And it's exactly, I wanted to point out, you had the 3 kind of pillars of that: setup, intent, and execution. That's absolutely, because you have to be a active participant from rep 1 to till you're done. And I think personally, that was my biggest shift in training, was you have to actively be there within every single rep, executing rep 1 the exact same, or the last rep the same as you did the first one. So you mentioned contralateral, ipsilateral, and bilateral. So what the different loading parameters? Let's just look at probably the most complex one. Let's look at a Bulgarian split squat, because this is the one that frazzles my mind. Can you just break down, let's attack the Bulgarian, what do the different loading parameters require from you during that lift?
Yeah, so if you were to load it ipsilaterally, it'd be anti-lateral flexion through the obliques. It would also place the load more proximal to that glute that you're loading on the left side. So from a hypertrophy standpoint, if you're not going bilateral, I would put it there, just because it's going to create a greater effect there.
You got to be able to load it. Yeah.
Yep. Also I think from a skill acquisition standpoint, in terms of loading, that ipsilateral is going to be a regression to contralateral, because the movement is distal to the proximal hip stability. You're going to find it a bit more challenging to load contralaterally. So I think in terms of how you were progressing your client, if you went ipsilateral first, well, like you might have some form of external support first, then and then move to body weight, and then move ipsilateral, and then move contralateral before moving bilateral.
I would love to hear about freaking Bulgarians all day, because they're love-hate exercise for me, for sure. They're something that I avoided for a very, very long time, because I didn't understand the importance of them. Because how many people do you see loading unilaterally at all on the Bulgarian in a normal gym? It's bilateral everything, because it makes sense, allegedly. All right, so what are some common mistakes you see with people just wanting to get in shape and live healthier lives?
So not even specific to exercise?
No, I want to, so let's go across the board, because I think you would agree that what you do outside the gym is often much more important than what you do inside of the
100%.
gym.
Yeah. I think a lot of people end up biting off more than they can chew in terms of trying to accomplish too many things at one time. I can't remember where the study was. If I ever find it, I can try to send it back to you, but it basically had a group of participants, and for each additional task they tried to bring on, it significantly dropped their success rate. So like for people who tried to do one habit at a time, they were successful. It was like somewhere around like 70 to 80% of the time. Whereas when they added just one more habit that they were trying to change, success rate dropped. I think it had to be at least like a 30% drop in success. And then for each additional one, like more. And Dr. Eric Elms has said, something like this too, where he thinks like when people first get started and they're looking to live a healthier lifestyle, start with movement and just movement, and do that for, a while until you really got the hang of that. Because when you ask somebody to change one thing, you're not just asking them to change one thing. If I'm asking you to start going to the gym, I'm asking you to organize your day to allow you to get to the gym for that 1 hour, and then for you to have, productive time before and after, whether it was like prepping your meals, making sure you get to bed on time. Like there's a lot of things that have to go right just for the gym thing to go right. So if we're then stacking on a bunch of extra habits, it's going to be that much more challenging. So I think number one is biting off more than you can chew. A second thing I think is, it probably also linked to that, but like it's this expectation that something has to come very, very quickly. And so like there's this almost anxiety or nervous energy surrounding the entire process. Whether it's like some form of like, I don't feel I'll be accepted if I don't do it this way. And like, I'm not the person to really jump into psychology, but in terms of like, if you're like, it has to be done this way or not at all, that's probably hurting you.
Yeah. That dichotomous thinking is just incredibly detrimental. Like we set up these goalposts for ourselves that if you were to look at it objectively, there's no way that you're going to reach them. And then we get down on ourselves, and then our brain is like, oh, you failed. Okay, let's mark that as a failure. And then it just snowballs and snowballs.
Yeah. My kind of thought process surrounding that is just like, I remove all judgment from any sort of slip up. And I think that's why a lot of my clients are willing to open up to me about certain things that they've got going on or what happened, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, let's just get back to it. Cause shit happens. And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm sorry that my, all this shit happened to me. And it was like, whether the things they chose to have happen or not, it's like, yo, like sometimes life happens, and sometimes you're going to have to reassess your priorities. And sometimes it's not always going to be getting to the gym, even though you're like, you want it to be, but it's not going to be all the time. So I think getting it in when you can, really trying to be active and try to maintain a healthy lifestyle. I'm not always, maybe my best salesperson, but when people are going through a rough time, I'm not like, oh, you have to make it. Like, I know that's what I'm here for, but it's like, my mom just, was diagnosed with leukemia. I just got promoted at my job, like all these things happening at the same time. And then like, throw on top of that COVID. And then you're like, oh yeah, make sure you still come to the gym. Like, let me go put a little bit more extra pressure on your plate. And like, I understand all those things. And while I believe that training can be an outlet, there are times where it might need to take a back seat to things that are more important.
Yeah. And a lot of stuff is more important, right? Like long-term, your health is just invaluable, but the day-to-day, like the difference doesn't happen. It does happen in doing the daily task consistently enough. However, each single day is not that important. And you mentioned removing all judgment. I think I wanted to talk about that for a second, because that's so incredibly important. And I think both of us would look back on our early personal training days, and we didn't do that. I don't know about you personally, but because we forget that people don't care about fitness as much as we do. And to some degree, we feel like we have to, I'm talking about like early personal training career, Josh, we have to hold ourselves to a standard far above everybody else. But what that kind of does, yes, people look up to you for it, and you may get a few clients because of it, but you're creating this chasm between you and your clients because they don't feel like they can tell you when they fucked up. They don't feel like they can tell you when they're having a hard time, and they don't feel like they can come in. And I can't tell you how many times people, just like you were saying, somebody had some sort of tragic event in their life and they're like, I'm so sorry, I can't make it. I'm like, this is not about me. Like, I'm here for you. Like, it doesn't do anybody any good to have that authoritative approach where they feel like they can't come and tell you, can't talk to you. And then they feel like they fail you if they don't reach their goals, and then they start to fall off and they kind of hide from you. I'm very glad that I'm getting to witness this huge shift in the fitness industry where almost everybody worth their salt understands that the old way of doing things was effective for a subset of the population, but it's not effective for the majority. And we work with the majority, most of us. So that was awesome to hear.
From a survival of the fittest standpoint, if you took somebody, like if you take a handful of people and you throw them into the old system where it's just like, it's this way or die, some people make it through, and then the rest of the people go unserviced and their life really not changed. And if anything, there's some like emotional scarring surrounding that entire experience, which makes it more challenging in the future. to actually find an outlet to, help. Ultimately, the reason that you got into training was to help those people, and they're going to be harder to help in the future because of that experience. So,
yeah, lifting, fitness in general, I'm not going to speak on behalf of running, however, but fitness in general, can be such a productive and um, enabling and empowering activity for us to do. But so many trainers force that the other direction. And I think that may be human nature. It's kind of frustrating, but you said something I don't want to. Oh yeah. So the survival of the fittest idea, that struck me, because those are the people that get posted on the Instagram feeds, right? Those are the people that these physique coaches are showing
the success stories.
Exactly. And it's so frustrating. They got that way despite what you did to them. They were going to respond to anything for whatever reason, genetics, enhancements of some kind, whatever it was. And then they get posted on this story like this is expected. And you cannot promise people anything like that. So that's frustrating. When I see that, it's pretty common. It's pretty dang common. And it's only becoming more common with social media. So, all right, moving on to the next one. I'm excited to hear your ideas on this one, because every time I've asked somebody this, a lot of them end up being stuff that I've applied myself, and then I get to learn something new as well. What are some of the core principles that you apply to your clients' training? And then after that, I want to hear, what are some of them that you apply to yours personally?
I look at everyone kind of through this, and this is like one of the things I learned inside of Prescript, which if you're a trainer and you're looking for a resource for education, I think is a great place to go.
Absolutely.
Is basically the idea that someone may or may not have a certain understanding of movement, and then kind of meeting them where they're at. So like Jordan Shallow kind of calls it like this phone book idea. So like if somebody has the last name with a P, you don't start at A and start flipping from, bird dogs on. You kind of find out where they're at, and then place a movement that is at their current skill level up against them. So while maybe in the past it was like, okay, everybody starts with bird dogs and works up from bird dogs, it's like, okay, now it's like, oh, well, this person can probably very well do like a landmine anti-rotation. So I'm going to start more from there, as like we could actually potentially load this position, as opposed to somebody who's not in now. I kind of have people do a certain set of a movement assessment when they get started. So I have an idea, because I'm not necessarily working with people one-on-one. I predominantly work in semi-private. So by the time they show up to that first session, I already have a program written, and I want it to be as close as possible to like what their actual skill level is that day. We can still adjust on the fly, but I'd like to be a lot closer versus trying to find out where they're at that day.
So you do a movement assessment before they ever come to your first session. Yeah, I would always do, during that initial consultation, have them come and work out close so I could do that movement assessment. Because you don't want to, a lot of times the movement or my assessment personally can also be a workout. So, and you're always constantly assessing and moving and adjusting to them.
Right. So I guess in terms of principles, like that's one is meeting people where they're at. And then another one is not necessarily being married to an idea of like where they're going to show up each and every day. Like I'll have clients who, stayed out late, maybe had a few drinks, or, didn't get a great night's sleep. And then it's like, okay, well, what adjustments are we going to make to the program today based on that? Maybe it's a reduced range of motion for this particular exercise, a new constraint, and then getting back to the program in following weeks. I want
to talk about that real quick, because I've noticed that is something that I don't think a lot of trainers do, because they write the workout beforehand and that's it. And they fail to understand that you can accomplish probably, let's just throw out theoretical numbers here, but 95% of what your original intent, what you wanted to accomplish with that workout, you could probably accomplish 90+% of it with a regression anyways. So it's like, why, or just a substitution, why would you not on the fly? I feel like you need to be able to make those adjustments in order to just be an effective trainer in the first place.
I agree. But then also on top of that, it's like the whole thing is it's like mostly a nervous system adaptation, right? So like if I'm looking to acquire a skill or improve a skill in this position, if my nervous system isn't in a position that would be conducive to doing similar loads, like its perceived load might be a lot higher. So like if I write something that was at their arbitrary one day 80% of their one rep max on their best day, and then I wrote the whole program on that, versus maybe something like an RIR or an RPE model. So even if it was like, hey, I want you to get to 3x6 at 2 RIR, but there's a drop in the amount that you can do, RIR would be kind of that constraint, because if you don't have reps in reserve, then you didn't actually execute the plan. So even if you did write it ahead of time, the RIR would allow for some level of flexibility.
Some auto regulation. I wanted to talk about RIR for a second, because actually, as you were starting that sentence, I was writing down percent or RIR, because I think, again, another hallmark of a good trainer, understanding that you can accomplish whatever that intent was. Say, like, I don't think that the average person needs to have percentage based programming. I don't think that the average mom and pop coming in, just trying to stay in shape, I don't think that's relevant to them. And honestly, I don't think I've had many clients one rep max on most lifts anyways. But you mentioned the RAR being like the constraint for that. Do you apply RAR with the average person? Because I think it's so much more practical than a percentage based program personally. But
yeah, so I can safely say right now that 98% of my clientele uses RIR and not percentages.
Beautiful.
That being said, like I maybe have a couple people who want to be like competitive in powerlifting or something like that.
Exactly.
So aside, even those guys, a lot of the time, I'm not doing a ton of percentage based stuff, because there's like a ton of low hanging fruit because they've already done a lot of the percentage based stuff, or like a 5-3-1, or just like different powerlifting programs. And then I'm like, well, like look at all this instability in your hips, and look at all this lack of core strength, and like look at this lack of external rotation in the shoulders, and this probably means you're not getting as much from your lats, which means all of this shit that you were doing isn't necessarily like you're not getting the most out of it. So I get more from like focusing on those other things than I ever have focusing on a percentage.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for taking some of the pressure off psychologically, because if you show up and you're dragging ass before you get into the gym and you have a heavy squat day and you are percentage based versus, okay, I have a little bit of room for really auto regulation there. Yeah, so I mean, I've worked with powerlifters before, and like you said, it was really plugging in holes more than anything, putting them on one leg, doing some overhead work, like not just pressing in front of them and squatting and pulling up off the ground like that. Exactly. Like theoretically, you need to be a heck of a lot more precise as you get closer to competition, but you don't need that 6 months out. Like you can be a lot more relaxed and then have that little bit of a valve where you're not having to show up every day and it's not this thing that's being forced upon you. So that's really the difference. Like exactly, like if you need that level of precision, the percentage base is probably going to get you there. But if you're doing hypertrophy work, like RER, almost every time, basically, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Moving on to, you mentioned your mentor a little bit, but who else has influenced you the most across your career?
There's been a lot of people that have got me here in different, like a different sense. Like some are business, some are relationships, some are literally the training side of things. Like Killian and Jordan Shallow are huge. I've worked with Killian for over a year now.
I appreciate Killian's message and the content he puts out for sure. I mean, this was a little while ago, but he put out a post about books he's reading, and I sent him, probably one of 50 people that sent him a message asking him for, what would he recommend, specifically on skill acquisition, because I'm sure he's branched out a little bit more, but that was kind of what he was focused on when I first was introduced to him. And he took the time to actually reach back out to me and pointed out a few books and stuff like that. So I definitely appreciate the work they're doing at Prescript.
Yeah. So those guys, Luca Hosevar, and then some of the guys that came out of there, like Theo Bowie and Cody McBroom. And Cody was like my nutrition coach last year when I was dieting for it was just like this goal I had set for myself, kind of like on my 30th birthday, I wanted to do like a photo shoot, and that way when I'm old I can actually say like, hey, I look like this.
Yeah, no, I got my 30th birthday coming up in November, man. I'm have to start a cut or something.
Yeah, so those guys, there was like a very short time where like I got to pick up stuff from like Andreas as well. So like there's been a lot of people who have affected me. Ben, who was the gym owner at Rain City Fit, has been huge for me, not only like in like just believing in me and kind of pushing me forward and stuff like that, but actually helping me get into certain places. And he's the person who helped me find the real estate agent to like get this space. So I feel like I owe him a lot. I owe a lot of people a lot.
We live in a weird time though, right? Because you can, if you want to, be mentored by somebody without ever actually speaking to them. Like if you put in the time and study and learn from people, and I think it's very helpful to have somebody that you can trust for recommendations. Like if, for me personally, it was Mind Pump. I don't listen to their show all that much anymore, but it was awesome to have somebody that was like, okay, we vouch for this guy. And I know they weren't bullshitting us. So like, that's actually how I came across Jordan Jallow, was they had him on the show quite a few times. They spoke very, very highly of him. And I was like, okay, this is a guy that understands applied biomechanics on a fucking level that is just out of this world. And is, I think more importantly, able to actually convey that to people. Yeah, it's just an awesome time to be alive. We can learn from the smartest people in the world, and most of the smartest people in the world are putting out information out there. So I think self-education is just, it's probably a necessity going forward. I don't think that you can get away from it. So you mentioned that Cody McBroom was your coach. Do you often hire coaches to learn from them?
Yeah. So I think that's part of the reason why, like, when I started Prescript, why I ended up hiring Killian, because it was like either that or like buy some Prescript programming, but like Killian was going to write it specific to me, and I knew that he had a thought process that would reflect what I was learning inside of Prescript, or if not, why he decided to go a different route or something like that. So I learned a lot from him, just kind of like getting the program, asking him questions, what was the intent here? And like, a lot of the times there was like, a good chunk of the time it's like, oh, was this what we were trying to do? And he's like, yeah. It was like, okay, cool. And it was just cool to see it like in action, and then like maybe some things that I had thought ahead of time. Yeah. And then like just how it might have, it kind of just sharpened what I already had knew or studied.
Yeah.
And then it also gives me a real world, like I'm kind of like the test dummy before it goes out into like where it can affect other people. So
do you apply that for most things? Like, do you try to learn and apply it to yourself in your own training as much as possible before you kind of branch out and apply it to others?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Almost everything, like, it's even up to things like including back pain and stuff. Like, so like I went through a little stint where I kind of like fucked my back up trying to like be a power lifter or something. And
We've all been there.
Right. And then like having to navigate my way out, and even like, going to the doctor, seeing some PT that just tells me to lie on my stomach and push myself away from the floor. And they're like, that's going to fix your back pain. I was like, fuck. Didn't work. And then like hiring other coaches, and then their pain-free methods. And then I was like, okay, seeing how somebody could have adopted this way of thinking, but this was still kind of an incomplete thought process, learning from other people, and then seeing like, oh, what these guys did right and what could have been applied. So like all of that down, and then reading more about it, and then being like, okay, yeah, like I did kind of do these things. And I've always been kind of the guinea pig for myself before I like had other people do it.
That's awesome. You mentioned reading. I wanted to ask you, I think personally, I absolutely avoided reading for most of my life, but within the last decade, I've just immersed myself in it because I don't think that there's a more valuable tool out there. I don't think that there's a more transformative medium out there than actually reading books. I think it can absolutely change your life for the better. What are some of your favorite books?
I think there's a lot, and it really depends on the subject.
Let's go. Can you give me just 2 lifting books, 2 exercise books? We'll go 2 exercise books, 2 mindset books. That'll probably branch out to some more.
Periodization by Tudor Bompa.
I could not believe that guy's name when I bought his first book. I'm like, this is an interesting name.
Right. Yeah. It's a pretty cool name.
It's hard to forget.
I really like just how simple Eric Elms' like strength pyramid is.
Yes.
So like you have something that's a lot more like very technical, like the periodization. And then you take something that's like, oh, this is very practical, and here are some things that you can do. And like Eric Elms makes it very digestible, I think. And even from like a Gen Pop standpoint, you don't have to know a ton about programming to read that book.
In reality, you only have to read the first like 4 chapters, right? Because those are the ones that actually are going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah. And so I think if I was going to go 2, it'd be like that one, and then that one, from a training standpoint. And I mean, minus like the PSL1 manual, because that thing's fucking great.
I got to actually thank Eric Helms, and he came on the podcast. Like I got lucky, but I got to thank him for his books because like legitimately, that framework is so invaluable. Like being able to distill all of that information into what actually matters first and foremost, what you need to take care of first and foremost. Like I feel like those kind of books absolutely are some of the most valuable out there for trainers, both the nutrition and the training. I think that if you're not reading that as a personal trainer, because like other shit is going to come up in people's lives. Other shit is going to come up in your life. You need to be able to know what you need to revert to, like what you can revert back to and still make progress. Let's say some on mindset.
So there's a book called Behave. It's Robert
Sapolsky.
Yeah.
Yes. Excellent book.
That one, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow.
Yes. Okay. So that's on my shelf. That's been on my shelf for a while. That's one of those books I read. I have different reading points throughout the day, but I try to read something right before I go to bed. And I chose that one, which automatically made it a lot more boring because I was half asleep. But that's a good book. I've heard that recommended by so many people. It's good.
Yes. I would say, you know what, it's a good book when you're reading other books that are smaller books that take bites out of those books. And I think I think both are great. So I think like there's the book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and then there's Atomic Habits, and he takes bites out of The Power of Habit.
That Power of Habit is original, right? That one was out over a decade ago.
But yeah, and that's like the more research side of it, whereas like the pop culture version.
I haven't read Atomic Habits. I have a problem with people when I see it on too many feeds, when I see it on too many posts, I'm like, okay, I don't want to read this book.
Yeah.
I'm Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Can we talk about that just 1 second? So is that about understanding that you're going to have this kind of almost involuntary initial response and then being able to go around it? That's my understanding.
Basically like different forms of thinking, because even the book, I think Switch talks about it, where it's like basically like you have this formalized logical thought process for how you might do something, and then there's the emotional thought process behind it. And you might think that you've got a really good plan, and you're like, oh, this is exactly how it's going to get done. But and this is where coaches talk about something like this. It's like creating buy-in, and it's like, okay, well, what can you do that gets more of a visceral gut reaction to that plan that is like, oh shit, yeah, I want to do that. And then like in the book Switch, so again, it's a book that takes bites out of this book, which again, like I think there's a time for both, but it's helpful to help convey that image. But it's like you aren't necessarily going to get something done if you just use one side of the brain.
Yeah.
Because like you could have the emotional elephant that wants to do it, but if they don't know how, nothing's getting done. And you can have the rational thought process, but if you don't have like the motivation to do it, it's not getting done. So it's like how to get both of those. And thinking fast and thinking slow is less about how to do those things and more about how those things work, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Whereas-
of course. Robert
whereas-
Sapolsky does a great job of stuff like that. I'm reading his book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers right now, about stress. And I find it so useful. I don't know if it's probably you as well, but for me personally, I like to understand the mechanisms behind things, because once I understand like evolutionarily, biologically, physiologically, why something happens, I feel like it's so much easier. Like when I have initial like sharp response when my girlfriend says something to me, and I immediately am like, well, that was not appropriate. Like that was not the logical way to go. But I think books like that, like Robert Sapolsky, Behave was a great one as well. Like having people break down the mechanisms and the reasons behind things, I think is so beneficial for me personally.
Right. Like, oh, I might have been a little hungry when I snapped back. Like I don't have the patience that I normally have. Like what conditions might have needed to be met in order for me to respond better in that situation. And I think that that's also helped in my relationship with my wife as well. Being able to be like, okay, like, oh, we tend to maybe bicker a little bit more, like getting towards the end of the workout, kind of post-workout eating, we're both maybe getting low blood sugar, and like something happened and maybe she's a little bit more cold because there's air conditioning in the gym, and now this one thing will set her off that would normally not.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, it's got to be something else.
The big piece behind that though is having the detachment from your ego enough to admit when you're wrong, because it's so easy to like, okay, I'm not going to admit I'm wrong. I'm not going to lose this interaction. But it's like, that's not what it's about. Yeah. Like we want to be able to make decisions based on like actually what we want to do, not this reactionary, fast response that's not even really what we want in the end.
Right. Yeah, well, I really like that, and I think that's one thing that I've been saying a lot more recently is like, what is the outcome that you actually want? It's like there's the thing that you're like, oh, this is what I feel like I should do, and it's like, okay, but is that going to get to the thing that you want? And if it's not, then maybe we shouldn't do that thing.
Yeah, I think that, at the end of the day, like having a little bit more of like an engineer mindset where it's like, well, let's evaluate all of the possible options, all of the evidence, and let's make as an objective decision as possible. And that's kind of hard because the fitness industry, everybody can do fitness, everybody can do nutrition, everybody can do all that. So it becomes so personal. And like, in fact, to the point where I've gotten kind of attacked by people before on social media, so it doesn't count, don't care about it. But where it's like, no, I am just objectively telling you what the facts are and why I made this decision. I'm not making it because I think that this approach is the best approach or this diet is the best diet. I'm making this based off of the evidence. And I think that's really the core and experience. I think that's really the core of the quote unquote evidence-based movement, evidence-based approach. But then you also have to be like, okay, I'm going to take into consideration all of the facts, including my own experience, including anecdotal evidence and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, your own experience is to some degree evidence. It might be a little bit harder because it's like, oh, we didn't have a, controlled environment to know exactly what might have, but you might have a hypothesis that could then be tested.
Awesome. We got a little bit deep there. So I'm going to go into, actually, no, this is also a deep question. I want to ask you personally, why do you lift?
I want to be able to move well. It's just a big one for me. I feel like one coach that I know, he's like, people who lift are mutants compared to normal human beings. And I was like, it's kind of true because like, you'll see somebody try to pick something up and they're like, oh my God. And then like, you can be about the same size and be like, oh. Like, all right.
It's nothing. Yeah. Like you open so many doors for yourself by getting stronger. Like you don't have to be the strongest person in the world. In fact, you probably won't be the strongest person in the world. Has that reason evolved over time though? I would probably guess that that's not why you started lifting, right?
No, I mean, the reason I lifted to start was because I wanted to look like a personal trainer.
Yeah.
Like I was very skinny. I think my first weigh-in, I probably had all my clothes on, and it was probably like the middle of the day with my shoes on, and like
Post meal.
probably.
Yeah.
I was like 150 pounds. This is like post senior year. I'm like 6 foot, 150 pounds. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna really want to train with me. I look super scrawny. Which turns out that's not the only reason people train with you.
Yeah.
So there's more to it than that.
It may kind of get you in the door.
Yeah. I've had clients since that were like, oh yeah, like I wouldn't work out with this guy because whatever. And I'm like, this is neither here nor there, but that's their reason. I wouldn't say that that's the reason for everyone. And also like, if you look like you lift, but you're the type of person that nobody wants to hang out with, nobody's going to want to train with you. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they may start with you, but like if you focus all of your energy, like if that's your entire identity, that's going to be a problem. If you don't identify as somebody that, actually puts in the work to help people, you're just going to be going down one road. You're going to get one kind of clients. You're probably not going to get very much results. Like we talked about, you'll get some results with some people, and then you'll show everybody that, but it needs to be much, much deeper than that. All right. So the final question, this question we ask everybody on our show. It's the most, actually, we got pretty deep today. More deep than most of the other episodes I did, but how do you feel that the industry of personal training can improve overall?
I think there's some real change makers out there right now, man. There are people that are like really working to bring this information that I think really needs to change to the forefront. How could the fitness industry change as a whole? I think that, again, we're starting to see it as like some of these people going into the more commercial spaces where more people are. I think that the type of information that people are providing when they're invited onto larger platforms is a thing. Because I mean,
like the more mainstream platforms, you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I could be like, you by yourself in your gym, you can make a difference. It's like, yeah, but that's kind of like,
yeah,
it's kind of like recycling. Like unless major corporations do something, shit's not going to change. But anywho, don't want to get into that. But
no, I think that's important because you can become a little bit nihilistic because you are putting like busting your ass doing the quote unquote right thing, helping people, and then you look down the street and there's somebody, just a revolving door, just people coming in and out, and they're not serving them the way, or you see the online trainer that's got 300 clients that they send the same thing to every month. Like to some degree, that's what we're trying to push against with Level.
It's great that you guys are doing that, but I will say one thing that Killian actually said to me directly, and it was kind of like, like I was of this framework where I was like, well, fuck, look at this guy. He's doing this bullshit. And like people go to him. And he's like, yeah, why do people go to him? He's like, oh, for this, that, and the third. Like maybe it's like he's doing this form of advertising. It's like, why don't you do it? And it's like, you kind of end up kind of hating on that person for doing something because you feel like they sold out and that resembles something. But like what I was telling our new trainer, we can be online talking about the benefits of doing single leg work, and it's like the benefits that you're selling are actually more features than benefits. It's like the result that the people are going after versus the feature that you're selling. So what could improved hip stability help with? Be able to help you break through a strength plateau. That's a benefit. That not increased hip stability. That's a feature. And I think for a trainer to understand that and then be able to sell that, I think is another thing too. And I think that the thing is like more good trainers need to understand how to sell shit. And I think if we do that, we'll see more good trainers selling shit, and then we'll see less people going to the people that know how to sell shit, just know how to sell shit. So it's like good trainers need to acquire more skills outside of training, like copywriting, marketing, sales, like all that shit.
Writing in general, I think, is incredibly valuable. Just organizing your thoughts in a way that's coherent is incredibly helpful. And it sucks though, because I wrote for a very long time. I worked with in my own business, and then I worked with a couple of other health and fitness entrepreneurs. I was writing for our e-commerce website and stuff like that. And I ended up I'll talk to people and I'll be like, is this the appropriate word? So I kind of brought some of those habits from writing, which were very, very helpful. Like, I tend to overthink things though. Like even just with these notes, like I for your episode, I rewrote a million times because like I didn't like the way that I said something. But I think that being able to communicate with people is incredibly, incredibly important for personal trainers. How would you where would you point somebody that as a personal trainer wanted to get better at selling something? Selling their services rather.
Yeah, so there's like little books out there, like there's this book called like Words That Sell, and it's just like a book full of like headlines or slogans. And like if you're gonna write on Instagram, or if you're gonna have a landing page and you want something that potentially hooks people, and it gives you different situations where you would use these. So it'll be like pages for X, and then there's like books like Joey Persera's like Why Do You Hate Money, and then it's basically a book on copywriting, and basically how to convey something emotionally, and like all the courses that I've taken and all of the like I've bought stuff from different trainers who were like selling how to sell online stuff, because all I wanted to do was learn how to do that so I can help more people. And if you don't learn how to sell, you can't help more people. And so as a trainer, being there, just waiting for people to show up, and you're just performing exercises, like in saying what they do versus how it can connect to somebody. Like if somebody can understand how your workout can help them crawl on the ground with a grandchild, or how their workout can help them feel more confident in a social situation, like being at a pool with their family during Labor Day weekend or something like that. If they understand that that's what you're selling, then they're more likely to come. But if what you're selling is improved hip stability and increased proprioceptive awareness, they don't give a shit.
They don't fucking care. They don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
So you're talking about finding their deeper why. Like, what is the actual reason? Not only for them coming to see you overall. Like, I feel like that's step one. If you might as well throw not any chance, but most chance of success out the window if you're not at least finding that deeper why, because you need to remind them of that when shit starts getting tough. But then it also goes much more deep and finding the why, like like you said, are they going to get more confidence, things like that.
Absolutely. I like one thing that I tend to do is, because my clients tend to stick around with me for a while, is I like to call it recalibrating. Is like, hey, I just want to check in and see where we're at now, and like what our goal is right now. Is it still X? It might very well be X, and it might change to something else. And then it's like, okay, well, why? And then what constitutes good coaching for you? Like what would constitute good coaching? How would you like me to communicate that with you? So not just knowing why you're doing something or why they're doing something, but also getting clear on how they want you to do that. You're not necessarily a paid actor, and like you might be like, well, this is the way I do things, and that's how people leave. But if you're like, okay, I understand how they want me to do this, I understand how they want me to communicate this with them, and if they mess up, they want me to do this instead of what I maybe inherently tend to do. Like, they don't want you to call them out, they want you to have a nice conversation and maybe remind them and check in, and like, or maybe somebody wants you to put your foot up their ass, and then you go, hey, like, why are you doing this shit? But you're not going to know that unless you ask.
Yeah. I think that at its root, learning a little bit about human psychology, that kind of starts to fulfill that box of communication, but also the selling aspect, like you mentioned, like the copywriting, what words to use, what colors to use, things like that. I think that the tools that I learned from being a personal trainer have been so absolutely incredibly valuable across all aspects of my life. Being able to talk with people, like, I mean, how many times have you first time meeting somebody had to sit there and keep a conversation going for an hour? Like, that is an incredibly valuable skill. I think that learning how to write, learning how to speak, and learning how to have a conversation with people are some of the most valuable tools that you can learn.
Have you heard of the concept of like success traits? So it's not necessarily something that you would do that applies specifically to one industry, but something that all successful people do across multiple industries. And I think, being able to communicate and understanding human psychology is like one of those things that will cross industries.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because you're human yourself as well. So
Yeah.
I mean, we're all just monkeys interacting with each other, and some of us aren't thinking about anything while we're doing it, and some of us are. So I think the key is to be one of those people that's thinking and trying to follow that, have that iterative mindset where you're always just trying to, okay, that didn't work, I'm going to keep moving. Okay, that didn't work, I'm going to keep figuring things out as I go. Both in your professional and your personal life is probably the key to success long term.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome, man. Well, this was freaking, it was good talking with you.
Thanks for having me on.